So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 o'clock Central Eastern Time, Europe. I see people joining. We have about 60 participants, 65 now. So we will wait for a few more minutes before we get going. Yeah, the numbers are growing. We have 50, 70, 75 people with us. So I think we should get going. We have people joining, but they will be joining in the next few minutes. So let me welcome you all. We are so happy to have you with us today. This is the third of the EPR Masterclass series in 2021. And we're discussing a very interesting issue. How do we ensure a level playing field with multiple PROs? And of course, to give my personal taste, if we look at the numbers at least in Europe, in the different countries where we have comparable, let's say, results, we do see that we have the best results in countries with single, well-managed PROs. Now, it's not necessarily the only reason why we have good results in those countries, but apparently there is a correlation. There should be a correlation. So the main question most of the times is whether to have one or more PROs, but once you decide, once it happens that you have multiple PROs, you need to make sure that there is good monitoring and there is a state that manages eventually to create a level playing field between the competing PROs. To discuss this very interesting issue today, we have three esteemed speakers, and we thank them for joining us and for sharing with us their thoughts and their input. And without any further delay, I pass on the ball to Joachim to get us going.
Thank you very much, dear Kyriakos, for this kind introduction. And I'm very happy that all of you are with us today again, and that Scott and I, your moderators, are again able to welcome you and to have again a very great panel of speakers today to share their experience and their point of view to this interesting topic, as Kyriakos. Oh, now my sharing is deactivated. Perhaps you can just activate it so that I can share my few slides with you. Thank you. Thank you. So just to recap, the webinar is co-organized inter alia by the Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance, which is a club of 27 members and partners, all owned by the so-called obliged industry and all run on a non-for-profit basis. My members have an experience of up to nearly 30 years now. We are serving more than 200 people with infrastructure for collection, sorting, and recycling. So we learned a lot in these years, and we learned a lot from the various realities because the interesting thing is, of course, that the EPR system in each country is somehow reflecting the economical situation, the cultural situation, the situation, how you deal with many different topics. And that's one of the reasons why our EPR systems are so different. Of course, a different system whether you live in Iceland or whether you live in Cyprus. Two islands, but still totally different system. So you can learn a lot from these various realities. Many best practices can be shared, many failures can be shared as well. And so we always try to do not to do the same mistakes, but to do our own new mistakes, so that again we can learn from each other. To remind you, producer responsibility is an economic tool to include the end of life of a product in the thinking, in the responsibility of those who are putting a packaging or a product onto the market, so that also the cost for the end of life management is included in the product price. And the job of a PRO is to establish a circle where the packaging is staying in the economic circle, and the ultimate goal is to make as much packaging as possible circular. And by this, the PRO has to deal with all the different stakeholders, has to collect money from one side, from the obliged party, and give it to those operators where there is a financial gap. And as you all know, it is already quite difficult if you have only one PRO in the middle of this circle. Imagine if there are 2, 3, 10 in Poland. I think there were in the meantime over 40 PROs. So you have to organize these central position on top of the circle, and this is the job very often of a central agency, an independent oversight, which was also the learning from the European Commission in the Waste Framework Directive from 2018, that in case of competing PROs, you have to have as a member state such an independent oversight. Perhaps you remember last year when we had one of our webinars, we had a representative of the German Central Agency reporting about their work. And today we have also 3 experts who are managing this difficult topic with us. Again, just to show you how in Germany this is, for example, functioning. A lot of control, a lot of talking to each other, collecting data, checking data, etc., so that the competition is working, that there's a level playing field, and in the end that the circle is turning. Our packaging circle is turning in the best way. So thanks a lot. Yes.
Sorry to jump in. If you're showing the slides, we're not seeing them.
Okay, super.
So if you want to share them.
Okay. So, but my talking is over already. Very sorry, but I think I outlined the most important thing. So I'm very happy to have my 3 experts with us telling us their stories, but I'm even more happy to have Scott with me, who is always rescuing me if I do something wrong. So I now quickly pass to Scott to Scott for your part. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Joachim. It was well done. The slides, we didn't miss them. I'm sure they would have enhanced, but it was great. So really appreciate that. And it's great being back here with you on this particular session. So I'm Scott Cassell. I'm the CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute. It's nice to be here with Joachim, Kyriakos, and the rest of the speakers. To talk about managing PROs. I'm going to just give a little bit of an overview about the systems in the US, the EPR systems, and provide some context for the other speakers as well. Our organization is a national nonprofit. We've been working to build capacity for product stewardship and extended producer responsibility for the past 20 years. We have a board of directors of state and local government agencies. Those are the ones here to the left of the screen that you see. And let me put it into full screen mode. The left of the screen, we have members from 47 of the states and hundreds of local governments. We also have partners, mostly from businesses, 120 of those businesses, organizations, including environmental groups and international governments. Looking at this topic of multiple PROs at a high level, we're interested in coordinating on 3 different areas. One is to give a streamlined customer service, meaning for the customer, the resident, that they don't get confused, that the system appears the same no matter if it's one PRO or another. So the collection infrastructure is consistent for them. It's sufficient. It meets the convenience standards. And there is a single website and a single toll-free number. I think the preference is for the government to have that. So if there's PROs going out of business, the government has that consistency. But the multiple PROs would use the single website and toll-free number. Second, streamlined government review. So if there's plan submission coming in, whether it's one plan or multiple plans, that they're coordinated somehow. The data collection and reporting is also coordinated. And last is the level playing field, whether, again, it's done by government or a clearinghouse. It's market allocation, the cost allocation, it's fair for whichever producer PROs they are, and there's no free riders. In the United States, most of our PROs are actually single. Most of the programs, the EPR laws, they're written, though, if you see the bottom left here, the producers are given the option to join a PRO collectively, or they can implement a program individually. Well, most of them do choose a single PRO in the United States. The PRO submits the plan to the government regulatory agency, and they provide their oversight function. And then the PRO contracts with the services. And you see here on the bottom, we have Paint Care, Call to Recycle, which are for batteries, rechargeable and single-use batteries, Mattress Recycling Council, Carpet America Recovery Effort, Thermostat Recycling Corporation, and End-of-Life Vehicle Solutions for Mercury vehicle switches. I was glad to hear Kyriakos say that in what his experience is, it's single PROs, but we're now starting to get some experience with the multiple PROs. So there's 3 options that we see for managing multiple PROs. One is what we call mandated cooperation. So a government agency in the law, we're starting to have requests actually from competing PROs that they would like government to say, you 2 or 3, whatever, need to work together and figure it out and work out whatever arrangements. Will give you some stipulations, but we want you to work out the coordination. A second is with the government regulatory agency themselves, being the arbiter of the multiple PROs. The example here is pharmaceuticals. There's also in packaging, we see this as well. But the pharmaceuticals is ironically moving towards the mandated cooperation on request of one of the competing PROs here. And then lastly, you're going to hear from Jason Linnell today about the independent clearinghouse. The US is really only experienced so far with managing multiple PROs. A few years of experience on the state of Illinois electronics recycling EPR program. The mandated cooperation has it so that the law would mandate that the PROs would submit one stewardship plan, or it could actually be to coordinate multiple plans for that seamless service. For Vermont's packaging EPR bill, which is not a law yet, they have would require the PROs to submit one plan. Again, government likes to see seamless service. They don't want to confuse the residents. But in this case, the government agency would still be providing the oversight function, registration, audits, plan review, and so forth. Government regulatory agency, the single point here of being the arbiter, would be providing all of these functions, including market allocation, cost allocation. Governments, in my experience, don't really like to play this role, concerned about being sued by one PRO versus another that might feel that their selection is not fair. So governments like to usually stay out of this part of the business, but some may want this. And then last is the clearinghouse, as I mentioned before. There's one plan submission from the multiple PROs, but the clearinghouse does the market allocation, cost allocation, and consumer consistency, but the government agency still provides that oversight function. They review that one plan from the clearinghouse, and Jason will explain a lot more about this. So that's it here. I just wanted to end by saying we have the three speakers. Alina from Romania is going to speak about the experience of the European systems, where there's much more experience that I know of than other places. The US has limited experience, as I mentioned. And then Mary Cummings is going to be talking about the Ontario program, where they have a lot of experience with a single PRO. They're actually moving to a very innovative system where there's a skills-based board that would be making selections of one or multiple PROs and coordinating all the different functions that I talked about. So she's going to be talking about the future. So with that, I will hand it back to Joachim to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear. Thank you very much, dear Scott, for this theoretical introduction in the possibilities, which was very, very interesting. Yeah, and I pass the word now immediately to Alina. She's working for Jaspers. It's a team of experts. I had the pleasure to cooperate with a bit. They were mandated inter alia to help the Romanian government with the clearinghouse and with all these questions. So they collected a lot of information, developed a proposal. So we are very interested to hear your findings and your ideas. Alina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. The first question, can you see my presentation? Can you see my slides?
Yes, I should have asked this as well. Yes, we can see it.
This is the most important point. So thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are located. I'm so very glad to attend this EPR Masterclass webinar with discussing such an important topics. So my name is Alina Oberdorfer. I work for the European Investment Bank, and for the most precisely for Circular Economy Division in Jaspers. And shortly, I will explain what Jaspers stands for. But the main scope of the presentation today is to present you the results of the study that you carried out last year in Romania on the new institutional system to improve the EPR scheme for packaging waste. In the first part of the presentation, I will give you a background of this study, and then I would like to present you the main results of this study. First of all, an overview of the current situation of the EPR scheme in Romania, and then the proposal of this study, the new institutional setup, and the impact of this new institutional setup. What is Jaspers? Jaspers is a joint assistance
Lena,
to support.
Sorry, can you put your presentation in a presenter's mode, please?
I have it in the presenter. Sorry, is this
no,
in the?
It's not in the presenter's mode. It's not full screen.
Oops, sorry, but I have it as a full screen. I don't know how to. Now it's not full screen, but now. It's not possible to see the slides?
We can see the slides, but it's not full screen.
There's a button that is on the bottom right of your slide going down. It looks like a I don't know, there's a symbol on the bottom that if you click it, it's right at the right corner. If you go down and click that, it will pop it into, maybe it's different on your screen, but
yeah, I have, this is strange because I have this on my screen in the presentation mode, and I don't know how to change it because I can see only the slide.
If you have multiple screens, if you have a second screen, probably that's the reason. Do you have a single screen or double screens?
A single one.
Yeah.
But it works this way as well. So
yeah,
I think we can read everything. So just continue.
I'm so sorry, but I'm not so good with the technical things. But
we can still see it.
We can see it in a good way.
You see, Joachim, I follow you with this technical.
No. Much better, much better than me. So no problem.
So let's continue with JASPERS. So I wanted to tell you what JASPERS means. JASPERS is a joint assistance to support projects in European regions. It's a joint initiative between the European Commission and the European Investment Bank, but implemented within EIB structure. We are more than 100 people working for JASPERS in Luxembourg, where is the headquarters of the bank, but also in 5 external offices in Vienna, in Warsaw, in Brussels, in Sofia, and in Bucharest, where I am also located. We provide support for different sectors, like for roads, for rail, air, energy, water and wastewater, and the last but not the least for waste. And as I mentioned, so the main role is to provide support for the project preparation, the projects which are financed with the EU money. We also provide assistance in preparation of different sector strategies and plans, and also we provide advice on horizontal issues. And the study that we carried out last year, it's such a type of horizontal assignment. The name of this assignment was establishment of an institutional system in Romania to increase recycling and recovery of packaging waste, but not only of packaging waste, and also for waste of electronic and electric equipment. The assignment was financed by the European Commission through the Structural Reform Support Program, and our beneficiary was the Ministry of Environment in Romania. The specific objective...
Sorry, Alina, I think in the presentation you are showing, you are not moving forward with the slides. So now, yes, now you do it. Okay, super.
Now it's okay?
Now it's okay.
Yeah, maybe this is a problem because I put when I put it on on presentation mode. That's a technical problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's better. Okay. Now it's and so I've just said that our beneficiary for this assignment was the Ministry of Environment in Romania, and the specific objective was to identify and assess the options to improve the efficiency of the current EPR scheme. We work for this assignment with the external consultant, national and international consultants, and our assignment consisted of 5 tasks. The first one was to review the best practices in different European countries, and with the focus on the countries with multiple pros. And we had a lot of discussions with the representatives of coordination bodies from Germany and Austria. And of course, we had a great support from our friend Joachim, representing EXPRA. The second task of the assignment was to assess the current situation of the EPR scheme, and then in the next task we identified the options how to improve the EPR, the current EPR scheme, and the efficiency of the EPR scheme. And of course, we had a lot of discussions with the national authorities and stakeholders. And in the last task, we prepared the final report, which was shared with all the stakeholders. Now, I would like to give you a taster of the current EPR scheme in Romania. So it was introduced in the legislation in 2002. In 2003 was for Romania the only year with only one PROS. It was actually the first PRO set up in Romania. And then on this graph on the right side, you can see the variation of the numbers of PROs for the packaging waste. So, of course, Romania is not at the level of Poland, as Joachim said, with 40, but the maximum number of PROs was in 2016, when Romania had 16 PROs, and then the number decreased. Why? Because in 2018 was important for Romania from the legislative point of view, not only because the circular economy package was adopted, but also because Romania transposed a few provisions of the circular economy package into Romanian legislation. And a few of these new requirements are related to the EPR scheme for packaging waste. And I would like to mention here, and maybe the most important one, that is the requirement which forces the PROs have to pay to the local authorities and the association of the local authorities the net cost for the management of packaging municipal waste. That means for collection and also for sorting of packaging waste. Regarding the packaging put on the market, so the Romania is above the EU average. But recycling, regarding recycling and recovery rates, if you can see the slide, if you can see the figure, the graph, is a Eurostat graph which shows the recycling and the recovery rates in 2018 for each member state. And in this graph, we can see that Romania met all the targets, also the total recycling target and also the total recovery target, but also the targets for each material, the recycling target for each material. According to our study in 2019, the situation was similar, but maybe the recycling targets for metal was not met. Even so, these figures are good. I think in the reality of the current EPR scheme is a little bit different. And so during this study, we identified a lot of problems with the current EPR scheme. The first one is that the many producers, and the number is 5,000 producers, which represent about 25% of the total number of producers, are not part of the EPR scheme. And also the responsibility for management of municipal packaging waste is still not clearly presented in the legislation. Another problem is that the PROs don't provide a full national geographic coverage. Based on the last modification of the legislation, so the PROs, all the PROs have to conclude contracts with all the municipalities in order to provide them the cost nets for the, as I mentioned, for the management of packaging waste. But the reality is different. As I've just said, none of them provide full national geographic coverage. Regarding the fees, the EPR fees paid by producers to the pros are not linked to the actual expenses of the pros, and these fees are much higher than the average at the European level. And also another problem is that the net costs that pros pay to the municipality are much higher than the actual cost of the management of packaging municipal waste. And this problem is actually not because of the pros, but because of the municipality, which don't calculate correctly the tariff, the cost which has to be paid by the pros. The last problem that I would like to mention here is that the industrial and commercial packaging waste contributes more to the recycling or recovery rate than the municipal packaging waste. Actually, the municipal packaging waste has the very low contribution to the recycling and recovery rates. All these problems are new. Are not new and are not specific, I would say, for Romania. They are specific for the system with multiple pros. And this type of problems, we can find them also in the guidance prepared by EXPRA on the best practices. The guidance, if I'm not wrong, it was prepared many years ago in 2013. Having this, taking this into consideration, the current situation of the EPR scheme with the problem that I just mentioned, and having in view the experience from other countries with coordination bodies already in place, and after heated debates that we had, all the national authorities and all the stakeholders of the EPR scheme, we came to the conclusion, so to recommend to the national authority, to the Ministry of Environment, to set up two coordination bodies. One should be a private entity, the clearinghouse, as Scott presented for USA. This clearinghouse, the private entity should be set up and managed by the PROs, and complementary to this coordination body to have another public body. Now a few words regarding the clearinghouse. Our proposal was to be set up through a normative act issued by the Ministry of Environment. And we also propose to have it as an association with only licensed pros as members. And in the first stage, this was what the producers and the PROs wanted to have. The responsibility of the clearinghouse should be only for packaging municipal waste, so all type of packaging municipal waste. Taking into consideration that Romania wants to introduce last year the deposit refund system for one-way beverage packaging, this type of packaging together with reusable packaging will not be covered by the responsibility of the clearinghouse. Here in this flowchart, which is maybe too small for you to read it, I put so the relations between this the clearinghouse and the main actors of the EPR scheme, and also the main responsibilities we have identified for the clearinghouse. And the main one is to allocate to the pros both the financial and operational responsibility based on the market share for packaging, for municipal packaging waste. And in the same time, the clearinghouse should monitor the performance of the pros based on this allocation. We also propose that the clearinghouse to have a register, to manage a register for all the IDAs. IDAs means the association of the local public authorities, but also for the individual local authorities, and also the register should be for the recycling and recovery companies. Another important responsibility of the clearinghouse that we propose within the study is to verify the net cost that the PROs have to pay to the local authority. Also an important responsibility is to coordinate a national awareness campaign every year and to perform studies to improve the packaging waste management. And the last but not the least, to report the data to the other coordination body, the public coordination body. And this public coordination body, the proposal is to be a new directorate within the Ministry of Environment. This proposal was made actually by the Ministry of Environment. And our proposal in the study was to have a single public coordination body for both for packaging waste and the WEEE. The role of the coordination of this public coordination body should be to oversee the implementation of the entire EPR scheme. So we have the clearinghouse responsible only for the management of packaging waste from municipal waste, but the public coordination body should oversee the implementation of the EPR scheme also for municipal waste, but also for the other type of packaging waste that means industrial and commercial packaging waste. Another very important responsibility that we propose for this public coordination body is to calculate the market share of each PRO and to send this information to the other coordination body, the private coordination body, the clearinghouse. And also we propose to have for this public coordination body to manage the register for the producers, which now is with the National Environment Protection Agency. Another important responsibility that we identified for this public coordination body is to manage the database for packaging, but also for packaging waste. At the moment in Romania, there are many authorities which manage different databases. One is the National Protection Agency, the other one, for example, is with the Environmental Fund Administration. And we saw this during the study that the data are different. And this is why we propose to have one centralized database managed by this public coordination body. And of course, as I've already mentioned, this public coordination body should supervise the activity of the clearinghouse and has to collaborate with all the national and local public authorities.
Dear Alina, can you wrap up eventually?
Yeah, sorry. So because the last is to establish the criteria for eco-modulation. And then, so the last slide is I'd like to see you that the impact that we are expecting for the implementation of this new setup for the impact of the clearinghouse is equitable distribution of obligation for the PROs to avoid the cherry picking to make collection obligation. I would also mention to increase the effectiveness of awareness campaigns. The impact of the public coordination body. The public coordination body should be an independent and better supervision of the EPR scheme implementation. And of course, we are expected to have a better reporting system. The study foreseen that all this, the national authorities together with the PROs and the producers have to start working on this new setup in January this year. It has not happened yet, but we are still optimistic because we know that all these changes are very important changes, and all the stakeholders need time to digest, and we hope that they will start working on this in the next period of time. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your question in the second part of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alina. I think it was a great work that JASPERS did, especially taking into account the, let's call it, messy situation in Romania up to now. So I really hope that they are making progress now, that the minister will stay, the government will stay for enough time, so that the legislation can really pass.
Yeah,
I learned that for many other countries that this is a bottleneck as well, that sometimes the governments are changing more quickly than you have a chance to pass legislation.
We also have this, yes.
Yes. So then, thank you very much. And now we go from Romania, from Europe, we go to America, the American continent, and first to the US. I'm very happy that to welcome Jason from the National Center for Electronics Recycling. So from packaging now to electronics, which is as minimum as important as packaging from my point of view, to manage it in the right way. They are managing already multiple PROs. I'm sure they have a lot of experience. So I'm more than curious to learn now what they experience. Jason, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the organizers for inviting me to present today. Just to make sure you can see my slides here. Hopefully they're full screen too. So
perfect.
They're fine.
Perfect.
Very good. All right. Well, as I mentioned, I'm with the National Center for Electronics Recycling. And just to let you know who we are a nonprofit group based in West Virginia in the States, and we work on multiple projects for electronics recycling, including data compilation, the implementation of a few of the state programs that are out there, and do a lot with a group that's known as the Electronics Recycling Coordination Clearinghouse, which is a lot of the state government agencies and impacted stakeholders, affiliated industries who are working to implement the state laws and work together on some of those projects. So we've been around since 2005, working on a lot of these issues at the US level and some internationally about electronics recycling. And I'm also going to talk about another organization that actually is the organization that manages the Illinois Clearinghouse, which is an experience that we have. We are a contractor to that group. It's known as the ERRO, which is the Electronics Recycling Representative Organization. It is really an organization that's made up of a manufacturer board that decided to work on the Illinois Clearinghouse. It had worked on some other programs in South Carolina earlier, but really main task right now is to work on the implementation of the Illinois Clearinghouse, which they contracted to us to do back in 2018 after the law was revised in Illinois. But to set the stage for where we're going and how we got here with the Illinois experience and how it might be a little bit different than what we have in other US states. So I think Scott laid it out well, some of the ideas for multiple PROs. So this experience is a little bit different, and I want to talk about where we're at with electronics in the US, just to give you an idea of what it's like. We have 25 state laws, and I say over 20 with some type of EPR program where we cover different types of electronics. It's not the more expansive version of electronics that you may see in Europe. It's really things like computers, TVs, monitors, printers. Those things are covered by the US laws, and over 20 laws of various forms of EPR. But unlike some of the other product stewardship programs that are in the US, there is no single recycling organization for the US electronics producers that are covered by these laws. There's no association like you saw that Scott listed that has a sort of job as just doing implementation of US recycling programs. But what we do see is we have about 75 to 120, depending on the scope of the products and what's covered in the state laws, that annually register and comply to go about implementing these electronic recycling programs in those states. And they do it through a different variety of methods. They can do it by hiring a recycler directly, and that still happens with a lot of manufacturers. They just, there's no PRO involved. They just go out and they hire their own recycler. They can also work with a compliance organization, and we have several of those in the US that you might think of as a PRO, and I'm going to refer to them as a PRO. But they can also, those PROs can also just be a recycler who has multiple manufacturer clients. But they do act as a PRO in the fact that they help and assist the manufacturers comply with the laws, including doing the recycling themselves. But there are also state laws where the manufacturer is just paying a flat fee to the state, whether that's a flat fee that the state then distributes via grants back out to local governments and collectors running programs, or they'll contract it to an entity that's going to manage a statewide program. And my organization actually does work in 2 instances like that in both Oregon and Vermont, where we are the contractor to the state and we manage a statewide program on behalf of the manufacturers. So in theory, you could think of that as a PRO, but it's a little bit different since it's a state contractor situation. If we're talking about multiple PROs, that means that recyclers and those PROs work together to comply with the requirements on behalf of their manufacturer clients. And in some states, they have to do that by just meeting a certain pounds target that's set by the amount that's sold each year by the manufacturer. In some cases, they also have to meet certain geographic requirements, so they'll have to have a certain number of collection sites spread throughout the state. And in some states, there's a minimal requirements, and they just have to basically offer a mail-back program and report on the results of that program back to the state agency every year with no targets, no geographic requirements, anything like that. So all of those approaches are sort of in the patchwork of state laws that we have in the US. And so that's led to many different types of implementation methods for managing PROs and managing producer responsibilities. Now, getting to Illinois, the difference here is that it's the first law to specifically allow for a clearinghouse or envision a clearinghouse in the law itself, which allows the industry to divide the responsibilities of the program through that law, through a clearinghouse. And it really wasn't defined in the law other than saying that the clearinghouse, it has to be at least manufacturers that are at least 50% of the obligation. So you can't have 2 clearinghouses, you can just have 1. But not all the manufacturers have to participate in the clearinghouse. And allow the manufacturers to set up and decide what the roles would be and what the functions would be and how they're going to divide up all the costs of that program. And that contrasts with other states where we do have some of the same organizations that are acting as what we would call PROs in Illinois, also act as PROs in many other states across the US. But there's no coordination through a clearinghouse. It's more of a free market, free-for-all system where they have to meet the requirements of the law, they have to comply, but they aren't being managed through a clearinghouse like in the case of Illinois. So let's get to Illinois. This is a slide I borrowed from Illinois EPA, kind of showing the evolution of the law. The key date here for us is in 2017 and in 2018, where what's known as CERA, the Consumer Electronics Recycling Act, was passed and signed into law. It allowed for this creation of the clearinghouse. It also did away with the pounds targets that had been in the law for several years, going back to 2012, and just made it a mandate for manufacturers to offer a program to all of the counties who opt into that program. And I'll get to that here in a second. Many different actors are in the program. The manufacturers have responsibilities. They're the ones that actually have the responsibilities in the law, and they can carry that out through the clearinghouse or individually. And they work with the municipalities. They work with group plans that I'll talk about, which are really just the PROs and how they all interact together. So the broad overview of Illinois, as I mentioned, doing away with pounds targets. You don't have to collect a certain amount to comply, but you do have to, what we call, move to a convenience standard, or offering a certain number of collection sites in every geographic jurisdiction that opts into the program. So in Illinois, that's on a county level, and counties have the opportunity every year to opt into the program, but they're not required to. So if you don't opt into the program, you're not part of this clearinghouse system, you're not part of anything else, but you can still collect electronics, just not funded by the manufacturer program. And if a manufacturer wants to, they could go out and they could set up their own program or work with a few others to set up their own program to cover all of those counties who opt in every year, or they can choose to work through a clearinghouse and divide up the responsibilities through that clearinghouse. And that's what we have today, is that all manufacturers who have been in the program for the first 3 years of the program, 2019 through 2021, have chosen to be in a clearinghouse that was set up by the ERRO organization that I mentioned earlier. And as I mentioned, it had to be 50%, so we have actually 100% of the manufacturers in the program. And the ERRO had to go about setting up rules for how we were going to go about implementing this program through a clearinghouse. Those rules were very important because it could have gone any way, and there could have not been any PROs actually within this clearinghouse. It just happened that is the choice that the manufacturers that were working through the board made up of the ERO and on a committee back in 2018 decided that that's how we would allow for the program to develop. So we had to set rules on, well, what is the allocation? How are the costs going to be divided? And it was settled on a method that involves both the return share of the category. So we look at the TVs that are coming back, the computers that are coming back, and we decide how much of each product category is coming back. And then we multiply that by the market share within that category for each manufacturer. So every manufacturer that's involved in the clearinghouse has a set percentage each year that's calculated. That's their obligation for the whole program of the entire year. We had to come up with a method for how you allocate those counties who opt into the program, and it was based on trying to match up as closely as possible to that manufacturer's obligation percentage. But we did it through groups. So manufacturers, instead of individually coming together and saying they wanted to cover a certain county or have a certain number of counties assigned to them, they decided to work through group plans, and that's where the PROs become involved. The clearinghouse assigns to the group plans or the PROs the amount of counties that have opted in based on how much we think is going to come in over the year compared to that obligation percentage of all the manufacturers participating in that group plan. So it's a lot of complicated sort of estimating, judging, and then trying to get it to match up exactly as we can, but there are always instances where it doesn't match up as closely as we'd like. We allowed for private programs that operate outside of that to give you credit if you're doing more than what's assigned. And we have a true up at the end of the year so that everyone has to collect an unlimited number of pounds throughout the year, but then we look at the actual amount that came through and we sort of level up with everybody and allow them to trade credits to purchase pounds, or it will count for going forward into their future year obligations. A key part of the program is the plan that's submitted. We do have to submit a plan every July 1st to the Illinois EPA. It has to be approved, and that plan has to show that we've met all the requirements of the law, including having the exact number of collection sites that's mandated in each opt-in county, or we have come up with an agreement with that county to deviate from that, and that has to be submitted as well. Just quickly on the roles here, the manufacturers are the actual entities who are responsible. They're the ones who the clearinghouse actually contracts with to participate in the clearinghouse. They can either do that individually, or as I mentioned, through a group plan. They can decide to go work through a group plan, or what you might refer to as a PRO. And for the first 3 years of the program, all manufacturers have participated through group plans to cover their obligations. That group plan or PRO, that's the actual entity that is contracting with recyclers and with the collectors to carry out their obligations. And as I mentioned, in some cases, that is about half of the group plans or PROs that we have in Illinois are actually recyclers themselves. So we had 6 total PROs, 6 total group plans operating for the first few years. We've had as many as 7. And they are the ones who choose who are the transporters to work out. They're the ones who bill the manufacturers for the actual cost of recycling, and they're the ones who work out the arrangements for the number of collection sites in each county that is assigned to them by the clearinghouse. So again, the PROs, they're the ones who have manufacturer clients. They're the ones who have the contracts with manufacturers to do the recycling. They select the recyclers if they're not the recyclers themselves, and they report back to the clearinghouse on the actual number of pounds that they collected every year, or every quarter, I should say, and ensure that they're meeting all the requirements of the law, including the recycler requirements, collector requirements, and other issues. One key issue in Illinois, the law mandates that manufacturers are responsible for covering bulk transportation and recycling costs. So collection is the responsibility of the local collector, and that is something that was agreed to in the law. So there's kind of a break between what's actually required there at the manufacturer level versus what's required at the collector level. And that was a compromise built into the legislation. And just to clear up what the clearinghouse does and does not do, because it didn't have to happen this way. This is how the manufacturers decided to implement this program. There could have been a clearinghouse that actually went out and did many things that a single PRO would do. It could have contracted with all the collectors and recyclers and managed all the data themselves, but the manufacturers wanted choices of their recyclers. They wanted choices of their management organizations. And that's how we came to this ultimate arrangement that we have, where we have multiple PROs acting and manufacturers choosing and sometimes re-choosing different PROs from year to year to implement the program. So what the clearinghouse does do is it works collectively for the manufacturers to submit that plan each year. We come up with those percentages for how we're going to allocate the responsibility among those manufacturers. And then we assign counties that have opted into the program back out to those group plans or PROs who are working on behalf of the manufacturers. We set the rules for how manufacturers participate and how they report data to us. We have established an auditing program for overseeing the pounds totals, making sure that everything is correct, making sure that it's coming from legitimate collection locations. And we do submit the annual plan back, an annual report back to the Illinois EPA, who has ultimate oversight over that. But what we don't do is do that contracting with recyclers, pay for service collection, pay for transport to recyclers. We don't actually decide which collection sites are in the program or out of the program. That's up to the group plan who's assigned to each county. And we don't mandate whether those assigned groups include all the programs that the local governments want to include in their program. We just have to make sure that the requirements of the law are being met. We have the minimum number of sites and that everything is covered under the plan. So that's a quick overview of how Illinois operates, and look forward to your questions later, but that's our experience so far in the first 3 years of the program.
Thank you very much, dear Jason. I think this is really interesting, and this adds another unique system to my bibliothèque in my mind, because as you said, from my feeling, you are more a PRO and an EPR system in the classical sense than a clearinghouse, an ordinary clearinghouse. So I think you have an interesting role and job. Congratulations. Very, very, very good. Now we are moving from the US to Canada first, before the Q&A, to Mary. Ontario, you have a very long tradition in separate collection. Your blue box, many people say that your blue box system in Toronto was in the end the inspiration for Professor Dr. Töpfer, the Minister of Environment in these days, to start the German packaging ordinance. So I don't know whether this story is really true, but I heard it from several people. So very interesting to understand. I tried to read your legislation. I was failing. I'm sorry. I didn't really understand it, how and in which direction you are trying to move now. So even more curious for your speech and for your explanation. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mary.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just to check before I start up, can everyone see the slide presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Perfect. Wonderful. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's true, if that story is true or not either. So maybe somebody else knows whether or not there's any truth to that. To start up, I just want to say thank you to PSI for organizing this. It's a fascinating topic. It's a really great topic, actually. And it's been great sort of hearing what's going on in the international context from all my fellow presenters on this today. So not everyone's going to be familiar with Ontario's framework. It's a little bit different than what's done pretty much anywhere else. It is a transition that we're in the middle of, and so before we get into some of the details on multiple pros and what Ontario is doing and why, I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about the previous framework, so folks have sort of a common understanding of where we were and where we're going. I'm also going to, in that context, explain what our PRA's role actually is. Because again, I think it's a little bit different than folks may understand or think. Because we're not really a clearinghouse. We're not a pro in the context that folks understand it. We're a regulatory authority. So it's a little different than I think, from what I understand in pretty much any jurisdiction. I'll explain sort of why that is as I go through. So let's just jump right in and talk a little bit about Ontario's historic EPR framework. So historically in Ontario, we did have what could be called a one pro model. We had these organizations called industry funding organizations, or IFOs, who for all intents and purposes act as a pro, submitted a program plan that didn't just speak about the objectives they would achieve, but how they would achieve them. That program plan would be approved by an oversight body and then later by the ministry. We had 3 industry funding organizations operating a total of 4 different plans. So they're listed here. And we'll talk about the transition and the status of all of this from this one pro to multiple in a little bit later. What's important to understand is much like the context where there is a one pro framework, stewards or producers, they only had one real obligation to discharge under the legislation at the time, which was to report and pay fees to that IFO for that program. And then that IFO, using the approved program plan that outlined how they would achieve the objectives and what the objectives were, would contract with the service provider, so collectors, haulers, recyclers, in order to achieve those requirements. There was an oversight body at the time, no real regulatory powers, monitoring the IFO's operations. So things like fee setting and fairness and things like that. There are some exceptions to the system historically, but for those who are from Ontario and understand, you know, what I mean when I say ISP or ISO, we're not gonna talk about those too much at all. Actually, it's because it's noise that isn't really necessary to talk about the context of a one pro system moving over to a multiple pro system. So, backwards, here we go. So let's talk a little bit about what the problem was. What was it that Ontario saw and had issue with in terms of this IFO or one pro model? So waste was increasing, right? Diversion rates were stalling. There was very little incentive to innovate. You had an approved program plan and you operated that approved program plan. So if that plan was in place and was operational and things changed 4 or 5 years in, there wasn't always the flexibility or the ease to make those sort of adjustments. There was lack of verified accurate data on performance, very weak regulatory oversight. As I mentioned, there was an oversight body, but they did not have any compliance or enforcement over the actual performance targets. We heard a lot from producers about the lack of ability to choose who they were working with, lack of ability as well for them to innovate. If they were able to do something on their own independently, it was very difficult for them to do that. We also heard from the service providers, so collectors, haulers, recyclers, that the IFOs were price setters. They had nowhere else to go, right? If you have one pro, they're the ones who determine what the price is in the market for collecting, for hauling, and for processing a material. And that really was leading to this feeling of a lack of competition or innovation in the marketplace. So what was the solution? So the solution that was proposed, and this was came into effect in 2016, it was like November 2016. It was in response to those problems. There were many attempts made to come up with a solution that would address those issues. You know, anyone who's familiar with the history, Ontario tried a few times, things got stalled. But in the end, we did end up with 2 pieces of legislation. The first piece, the RRCEA, right, established RPRA as the authority, as the regulatory body. We'll talk a little bit about that a little more. And enabled a new EPR sort of regime and framework that would be put out into frameworks. It was sort of like a cover page to what would come later, which was the details in those regulations. And then the Waste Diversion Act, Waste Diversion Transition Act, which really was about, okay, how do we move from part A, where we are with this IFO model, over to these regulations under the RECA. So it provided direction on that oversight. The objectives of the RECA, I think, are sort of listed here. It was intended to achieve and get at some of those problems that we were hearing about around competition, about having market-driven solutions, accurate information, high recovery rates, a strong regulatory authority and model to ensure all of this was occurring. So the key differences to sort of keep in mind between how Ontario did operate, and in some cases still does because we are in transition, and where it's going, is that now each individual producer is responsible for meeting requirements under the regulation. So I sort of said at the beginning there, before it was a very simple sort of model for producers to discharge their obligation. They reported and pay fees to an IFO in accordance with the IFO's rules. And that's where their obligation stopped. Now producers are free to figure out, okay, we've got this regulation. It's an outcomes-based regulation. It's not prescriptive. It's not going to tell me how to meet my objectives. It's just going to tell me what the objective that the policy branch for the ministry wants to see happen. What is it that needs to be achieved? No direction on how to achieve it. So it's giving those producers ultimate free choice. So what happened there, and the other key sort of difference is that then you'll have these companies starting to come into the woodwork saying, okay, well, we're going to help the producers try to achieve these objectives. We're going to compete amongst each other, and this is where you start to get these multiple pros concepts as opposed to the one IFO. We're going to compete with each other to seek out producers and say, you don't need to worry about meeting your regulatory requirements. Nothing we can do will discharge your legal obligation to meet those regulatory requirements. However, we can assist you. So it switched things over so that private companies were now competing with each other to provide services for producers who had a need. Much, the same way you've got private companies competing with each other to provide any services to any business who has requirements in Ontario. And then it created our RPRA. This is the key difference as well, who is an empowered regulator with powers to enforce compliance. That's my role. So as the slide said, as the bio and the introduction, I'm the deputy registrar at RPRA. I oversee the compliance and enforcement function at RPRA. So let's talk a little bit about how all of the players work together and what that really means when I say RPRA is the compliance and enforcement body and the regulator. So you've got RPRA, and then you have multiple pros all competing with each other, right, to provide these services to the producers who are the only ones who have ultimate obligations under this framework. You've got service providers now who can directly go to producers and compete with the pros to provide these services. So it's an enabled system where a producer can say, I'm actually going to contract directly with haulers and processors and recyclers to achieve my requirements under a regulation. I don't want to go with a pro. Even though there may be multiple pros in that market, I'm going to figure this out completely on my own. Alternatively, I can go for the gold standard service and find a pro that's going to offer me all of those things. RPRA is overseeing all of it, right? And by overseeing, we're regulating this, and I'm going to talk about what that means because there's very important things that RPRA does and does not regulate in that context. So let's move on to how RPRA works in that context and the authority and how it's governed. So we're a little different than I think what folks may be familiar with in other jurisdictions. We're referred to as administrative authority. What that means is we're independent from government. So in other jurisdictions, you'll find organizations that are like RPRA, but they're actually part of government. So they're funded by a tax base. We are not part of government, and we have accountability to the government. The government created us through that legislation. However, we're completely independent from government. We're also completely independent from those that we regulate. So what that means is we have a skills-based board, as Scott was sort of mentioning there at the beginning. The minister appoints 5 of 11 of our board members. There's also a ministry observer. Our board, though, does not have producers, does not have municipalities or service providers like the recyclers on it. This is a skills-based board who can make independent decisions about RPRA's regulatory role. As I said, we're not funded, and that's also a key difference from, I think, other jurisdictions where you see the organization that takes care of free riders and enforcement potentially having a board that maybe is made up of those producers. That's different for RPRA. I mentioned that we're not financed through tax base. So we are, though, financed through fees charged to obligated parties. So that means in this context right now, our fees are being collected by the producers. So the ones with the ultimate responsibility under these legislations. And then activities that we conduct, anything that we do is within the construct of our legislation and our regulations, or as per ministerial directives. I think the key part here is the self-funding aspect, which shields us from politics, from budget making processes, and the independent skills-based board, which shields us from the producer putting influence on our regulatory oversight and function. So our mandate, is sort of written here. I think one of the things that's important is that RPRA's key role is to undertake compliance activities to ensure compliance and enforcement, if necessary, with the requirements of the regulation. We're not a clearinghouse, so we do not do cost allocation or market allocation. And you'll see as I keep going through this presentation where that all fits in. So we're not there to dictate to the producers or the pros how to achieve objectives, how to achieve things in the marketplace in a fair way that, it's equitable amongst pros or anything like that. Really, we're relying on the marketplace to perform those functions. And we'll talk about how that works as well. So we are, as I said, the key mandate is around compliance and enforcement. So we have a compliance team with typical powers that you would find of other regulators in other jurisdictions. So while we are different in the sense that we're self-funded and we have that skills-based board, we are much like other regulators in the sense that we have powers for inspections and investigations. We can issue compliance orders. We have administrative penalty orders, and we have powers to prosecute. So that sounds a little scary to a lot of folks when they sort of hear how all the different powers that this administrative authority that's separate from government has. One thing that I will note that's very important to RPRA is our primary approach to compliance, which is something that we call C for C. It's about communicating with folks in a way that we remove barriers for them to comply. Most companies want to comply. They simply need to understand how. And that's something that is true for many different regulatory contexts. It's not unique to the world of IPR. And I'll note we've had a high degree of success with this. We've not issued a single compliance order. So we haven't actually used our enforcement functions. We are achieving compliance with our regulations and legislation through communication and education. So status so far. So tires transitioned. We have 5 pros operating today. Batteries transitioned, and there's 3 there. And E has transitioned more recently with 14 pros operating there. I will note that at the beginning, when we start this transition process, we often see many companies coming forward saying, I'm going to take a stab at being a pro. I'm going to try this business model. So they're not a regulated entity. They're not approved by the authority. They're nothing like that. They're just a private company who sees a business opportunity and wants to market their services to producers to say, I can help you comply. Often what happens is that stabilizes a little bit as time goes on. As producers actually start to pick who they want to provide these services for them, you see that sort of stabilize out. MHSW and Blue Box, not going to speak to. Those are still under the previous framework with individual IFOs or pros operating those. So now let's talk a little bit about what I think is sort of what everyone wants to sort of hear. So how is that working? How does this all work, and how does our RPRA really work within that? So producers, what we've learned with multiple pros and with this transition, the producers are now operating in a completely different framework. The idea of reporting and simply paying a check is no longer what is expected of them. They need to actually figure out their requirements and how to achieve them completely on their own. There's no individual organization that's going to do that for them with some sort of approved program plan. They have choices, and they have to make those choices in order to comply. We've also learned time is key. I can't emphasize this enough. Pros and the overall market actually needs time to understand the requirements and how to establish a system that achieves those requirements. Again, there's no roadmap here. All right, it has the outcome. These are outcome-based regulations that will say this is what an accessible system across Ontario looks like, and everything that system produces needs to be managed to a particular efficiency rate and standard. Stop. So now the producers, the pros, the market have to sort of figure this out, and that market adaptation, as we call it, does take time. It takes time for the service provider, so a recycler, to figure out, oh, there's no one giving me the price here. This is a negotiation with multiple parties now that I can sort of figure it out. So that whole process is something we've definitely learned takes time for us. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's very important that the authority doesn't dictate how the system or how the market should work. So we don't sit there and say, this is how things are going to be divvied up. We enforce, we ensure compliance, we explain, we educate. We want to make sure folks understand our role in this context. Ultimately, though, it is up to the market first. So the regulation, as I said, may have a requirement to set up an accessible system. Let's say there's five pros operating in that system. The authority will say, this is the requirement in the regulation to set up the accessible system. This is what every producer needs to meet. Now the pros need to go away and have time to figure out how that's going to work. With tires a little bit further along compared to batteries and E, we'll see how that goes. Ultimately, they could set up their own independent clearinghouse. There's many different options they could explore, as long as
Mary, time warning. Time warning.
This is the last slide. As long as that objective and system is actually achieved. And then finally, I want to note that communication is sort of the key concept as well. I mentioned that a few times, using compliance bulletins, procedures, making sure everyone understands those requirements, so that way there's standards and consistency in reporting. So I guess this is the last slide now. Is it working, right? Is this actually, is this actually working? I think the key is, well, we know it's working in the sense that material, so for tires, for instance, since that's the furthest along, is flowing, it's being collected, it's being processed. It's going to be some time before we can truly see whether the objectives are actually being met of that regulation in terms of higher recovery rates, jobs, innovation, competition, market-driven solutions, and accurate and verified data. So right now, too early to tell. And on that note, thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mary. Really appreciate it. And a lot of great information here. I'd like to invite Jason and Alina back on here as well for the last, I guess, maybe 13 minutes of Q&A. And hopefully we can have some, quick answers here because we have quite a few questions. So let me start with one here by Elena Bertacci from Maine. And I guess this is for you, Jason. The Illinois Clearinghouse decisions, it's made by a manufacturer board, as you mentioned. How does that board get chosen, and should that governance structure be set by the law or chosen by the PROs themselves?
Yeah, good question. In the case of ERO, it was sort of a self-selected board with working with an industry association that tried to get some representation from different sides of the industry, mainly on the sort of IT side and the TV side, different sides of the industry to be involved there. But it was not dictated through the law in Illinois. It was not set in stone. We've seen approaches where that has been proposed, where the clearinghouse would have certain slots set aside for different types of entities. But in this case, it was chosen by the manufacturers themselves. And that is how it was operated until this point.
Question for you again here, Jason, but let me just open it up to Mary and Alina as well, if you want to jump into any, and anyone should jump in real quickly. So Danny DiPietro from Maryland legislature staff, is the clearinghouse associated with the government or is it independent?
Well, I'll just quickly say it is not associated with government. In the case of the Illinois clearinghouse, it is a private entity. It's a separate nonprofit organization.
Yeah, the response for Romania should be yes. It's a private organization, but controlled by the state.
Okay.
And for Ontario, we don't have a clearinghouse in the context that I believe you guys are speaking about it. The pros could set one up, as I said, if they felt that need. We don't have one right now.
Okay, here's a question. I guess it's for any of you. We'll start with either Mary or Lena. How does the main organization evaluate efficiency of the PROs in terms of the methodology? Or do you leave that to the private sector, to the market to decide, hey, this seems more efficient, I'll go with this PRO versus another? Is there an efficiency and who does that? You're both on mute, so if you...
I wasn't sure if Alina wanted to start, but I can start. So our PRA, no one's reviewing the efficiency of the system, much like any service provider that a company acquires business for. Let's say it's their phone services. It's not about whether it's efficient. You can pay whatever you want to pay for the most inefficient PRO if that's what you want. Some sort of gold standard service is entirely up to you. It's the individual producer's responsibility to achieve the objectives, and it's left at that.
And it's the same case for Romania. I've already presented in my presentation. So it's the same what Mary said. So they pay, the producers pay what the pros say. No, that the costs is established by the pros, unfortunately, I would say, in the case of Romania. Yeah.
Okay. So here's one from Adrian Venam. We are a PRO that has managed the transition from a single agency to multiple agency in many jurisdictions, including Germany, Austria, France, and Ontario, Canada. He'd be curious to hear from each of you, what is the role of competition and antitrust authority, the role that competition and antitrust authorities have played in the opening of EPR markets?
Well,
Jason?
I'll go ahead. On the last note, antitrust, actually that was something that the manufacturers really needed to have some, I guess, assurances on before they went ahead and formed the clearinghouse in Illinois. And actually, the Illinois law initially passed and had the revisions to allow for the clearinghouse, but it couldn't get off the ground until a separate revision to the law was enacted by the governor that gave manufacturers antitrust exemption to work together to do things like divide up this Illinois market where you're telling the manufacturers which collectors they can collect from. So that was an important part. And then on competition, I would say it's important among those group plans among the PROs. The manufacturers have a choice. They can make a choice each year. They can change from year to year. And we have had many instances where manufacturers have changed group plans from year to year based on the rates that they're seeing, based on the services they're getting from those group plans. So it's a key part of the Illinois program.
And in Ontario, we're regulated federally by the Competition Bureau. So our legislation, our regulations, nothing in them, like as in Illinois, exempts competition or trust laws. So those things still need to be taken care of in the context of the federal regulator, which is the Competition Bureau here.
Joachim, I think you can help me explaining the situation at the European level and regarding the competition.
Yeah. Yeah, the competition authorities in Europe have been always very much involved in these questions, taking care that also the single PROs are following the rules. And of course, if you misuse your market power, they have interfered. So for example, in Germany, what Adrian was saying, for certain reasons, the waste management industry was partly owning the single PRO. And so they were able to contract with themselves. And this was one of the reasons why the antitrust authorities forced the German government to move from one system to a competitive system. So that's why I always say, please try to involve the competition authorities, whatever you do from the very beginning, because they play an important role. They have a certain role to play. They will not help you to find solutions, but they will tell you what they don't like. So that's why it's always better to involve them very early. And I've seen a question as well in the chat, which came into my mind immediately as well when I listened to Mary. Of course, the Ontario Blue Box system is still in the transition process, but it will be interesting to see how you will ensure that all local authorities are covered in the future. Because as soon as the obligations are done, why should industry buy further recycling certificates or recycling services? So in Europe, we have seen that in countries where you have a very strong competition without very strong framework, that they are concentrating on the easy stuff and are not following the difficult areas, which of course, depending on the government's decision in the end, we want to offer for our inhabitants everywhere the same infrastructure and services, and not only the one family houses and easy stuff.
And I think you hit it there. It'll depend on the framework that the ministry develops for that regulation. So once that final blue box regulation is out, that provides the framework, then RPRA is there to provide that communication, education to folks about how to implement. But we'll see what that framework looks like when the Ministry of Environment gets it out.
Okay, yeah, your program is reminding me a lot to the UK approach, the PRN approach.
It is very similar. We're not like the UK's regulatory oversight because they're within their government, but very similar.
You know that they are just changing their approach.
I did hear, yes. I know.
I think what we're learning here is transition. I think most of you have mentioned that word. This is transition. We're trying to figure out what works the best here. So a couple more quick questions. Mary, another one for you from Sydney Harris. Can you elaborate on how the skills-based board works? Like, how are those people selected? What number, how many, and how are they selected?
Absolutely. So the minister appoints five of those members, and there's also the minister observer on that board. The minister can also appoint the chair of the board. And then from there, those foundational members select the remaining 6 to bring it to a total of 11. And they're looking for, when they're filling out those positions, they're looking for skills. They're looking for finance and IT. They're not looking for necessarily, as I said, because it's independent, they're not looking for a producer or someone. They may look for someone with that sort of business knowledge and background. But the idea is it's an independent board, both from government and those that we regulate. So that's sort of how that structure works.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question from Sheila Kerr. Maybe Jason to start because it's electronics. What are the costs of multiple PRO oversight, in the various systems? Maybe you can talk about, how the cost in terms of efficiencies, and are those costs ultimately paid by the consumers?
Yeah, I guess in the end, everything is ultimately paid by the consumers. In the case, I guess I should have specified, because it is a little different in other countries and other systems. In the Illinois approach, there is no fee. There's no visible fee in any of the state approaches in the U.S. except for in California. It's all the manufacturers covering the cost, paying for the cost of the system, however makes sense within their business models. And with the clearinghouse itself, the oversight of the PROs, that there is a separate fee that each manufacturer pays based on, we have different a tier schedule based on their percentage that we calculate. So it's really based on sales. So the larger manufacturers pay more, and that covers the administrative oversight of the clearinghouse itself. And the manufacturers also pay a fee directly to the Illinois EPA for their oversight of the program. So there's basically 3 ways the manufacturers are paying in Illinois. They're paying a admin fee to both the Illinois EPA and the clearinghouse, and they're also paying for their recycling costs for whatever percentage comes in that they're responsible for. So yeah, there's all different types of fees, but they're all covered by the manufacturer, and that ultimately gets reflected in prices down the line.
Thanks. I see we have just one more minute, but Alina and Mary, if you want to just chime in, and then Joachim, I'll send it back to you afterwards. Either of you want to comment on that?
I can certainly add that part of the objective of having the multiple pros is that it leads to competition, which drives innovation, which leads to lower costs.
From the multiple pros from Romania, I've presented the many problems that they are. Even the system, the EPR system, has a long experience. It doesn't work currently. But we hope, and I think with my experience, maybe with this coordination bodies, with these two coordination bodies, which are mandatory, I would say, for this multiple system, the system could work better. Not perfect, but better.
All right.
We'll see.
Well, thank you. I'm going to say my thanks here to Jason, Alina, and Mary, and just say that, you know, it's a great webinar, you know, looking at the different levels of experience and in a very, very complicated topic. A lot more to come. We've got great questions from people here in the audience, so, you know, certainly more to explore. And Joachim, it's nice to partner with you again, and I'll hand it over to you to finish us up.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've tried to read all the questions as well, and I think we can only start a discussion during our webinars, because in the end, I know several consultants that try to analyze, and in the end they failed. I have to say, because the situation is very complex. And it is extremely difficult to compare approaches between different countries. So I think we really have to continue to talk, to exchange, to discuss. We have to avoid religious discussions, which is sometimes the case. And the question, is competition good or bad? Is monopoly good or bad? We have some topics in our EPR field where I sometimes have the feeling it's more religion than fact. So let's always concentrate on the facts and try to have the best for our inhabitants in the end, for our companies, the best solution. And it might be a different answer from country to country. That's a lot with the culture, has to do a lot with the culture. So thanks a lot again to all of you, to all the participants, and just be reminded, in 1 month we have the fourth webinar of our series this year. This time it's about the role of the waste management industry. They do the job in the end. They do the dirty job, the good job. They are sometimes part of the solution. They are sometimes part of the PROs, sometimes not. So I think it is very important to discuss their role. I learned that in some countries, waste management industry is very afraid of EPR because they are afraid to lose business. In Europe, I think many waste management companies have become very rich, very experienced. They are more now resource management companies. That's how they call them. They stopped to call themselves waste management companies, which I think it's an interesting approach as well, an interesting development, perhaps because of EPR as well. So I think another great topic to discuss, and I hope to see all of you again. Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.